Okay. And I think it's recording now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the way I used to start this podcast is by, starting to record and then starting the conversation with the guest. And then eventually the guest would say, have we started? When are we starting? And I would say, we've already started. This is it. This is the podcast. But I decided that I should change. This is the first time I'm trying a new introduction kind of thing. So let me introduce the podcast briefly. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll introduce just kind of your name, and then I'll let you talk about yourself a little bit. So here, this is the introduction of the podcast, the new introduction, okay? This is Intro 2.0.
All right.
So let me introduce myself first. My name is Jim Schneider. This is my podcast thing called Work in Progress, where I talk to my friends about the work they do and why they do it. And my guest today is this guy, Kain Osterholt. You can say hello to
Hi, I'm Kain.
to the people in the audience, the folks at home. So Kain, you're here to talk about work, right? Your work, why you do it, why you love it, why you're frustrated by it at times, or whatever the case may be. So let's say I meet you at a bus stop and I ask you what you do for a living. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, my typical response would probably be that I'm a software engineer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the simplest way of describing what I do for a living. Mm-hmm. But it has been a journey getting there.
Tell me about the journey. Where did you start?
Yeah, even as a young kid, my dad worked at a recycling center, and he actually acquired the nickname Mr. Pick.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I thought it was because he played guitar. I thought it was from
That would make sense, yeah.
But actually, it turns out it's because he picked things from the recycling center a lot.
Oh, okay.
Some of those things were, technology that we weren't too familiar with at the time. This is back in the 80s, early 90s, and picking computers out of the garbage and finding out that they still worked just fine and could plug them in and fire them up, and they were old for the day because everything had been replaced by a newer model, a newer generation. But as a young kid, I was able to learn how to program software, play around with electronics that were probably considered dangerous for young kids at the time. But
Well, so what kind of computers are we talking about? Like what brands, what models?
Yeah, one of them, the one that I remember the most is the TRS-80, which I think is named after the year that it was produced.
Okay.
It wasn't the first model that, I think it was Tandy and Radio Shack. I think it was a collaboration between the two.
Tandy. Yeah.
I want to say it's Tandy. I might be wrong about that detail, but I know Radio Shack branded it, and it had like a Radio Shack logo right there. And the way it was designed is it was just a one-piece machine. You plug it into the wall, and it's got a monitor built into it, a big hefty thing though, the CRT, cathode ray tube monitor, and monochrome, meaning just one color. And it had BASIC, so you could program in BASIC, and that's where I first learned to code my first software program.
Wow, so it's in the 80s, late 80s?
Well, the computer was made in the early 80s, but we were using it in the early 90s.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a piece of garbage that my dad had picked out of either the recycling center, or he also worked at a high school as a janitor, and as a janitor, you have access to all of the garbage.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, we basically had a lot of high school level software for these computers, where you'd put in a disk. We had just these piles of big 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, if you remember those. And,
Yeah.
Like shove one of those in there and see what it is, because often the label was kind of worn out or missing. And just kind of play around with games that were designed for math programs or other social studies, those kinds of subjects in high school, and then you play around with those as a younger kid, and you kind of learn high school level math and stuff pretty early, as well as how to program computers, and so that's kind of a big part of how I ended up working in the technology industry, as a programmer.
Mm-hmm. So at that age, you're in middle school?
Yeah, so I was probably 8 years old when I first
elementary
wrote a program. And
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What did that program do?
I think all it really did, it was a text-based game, and it would ask you questions, and you would enter responses, and then it would take your responses and sort of, if you remember that game called Mad Libs.
Oh yeah, I love Mad Libs.
Where give me a noun or that kind of thing.
Fruit.
Yeah, because the most basic thing I learned starting out was how to mess around with strings, and so it would be like input something that describes X, and then a paragraph would get dumped out with what you entered using the entries that the user had. So sometimes it would be just as a practical joke for my sisters, because I guess I have 3 younger sisters, and so at the time we were all rambunctious children, and playing with these computers, like I was able to program games that would make fun of them, basically.
Okay.
So I remember I had one that basically just said, enter your name. And then you would enter your name, and it would say, it would use the variable for the name, is an idiot.
Yeah, is a stupid garbage face.
Yeah. Stupid idiot.
Okay.
They learned how to work around it, though, by, they entered my name after they entered their name first.
He's a genius.
So it kind of backfired.
Yeah.
I should have put a rule in the program that says if you enter Kain as the name, it still uses your name instead, or some other name.
Hindsight is 2020. I mean, you can always go back and fix that.
Or have the logic in there say is a genius if you enter my name. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So this early kind of fascination with computers and software, thanks to your dad bringing this stuff home, is what got you started on this, lifelong career of software engineering, right? So, but throughout high school, you're studying, I assume, like advanced mathematics and continuing to write programs and so forth?
Well, in high school, I had to take all the usual subjects, but I was homeschooled before high school, so that allowed me to study more untraditional subjects, and my dad was a musician, has a music theory degree, and so
Mr. Pick.
Yeah, he was able to teach us all instruments growing up, and so we did a lot more music and a lot of computer-related stuff, and he eventually went back to school to get a computer science degree as well.
Yeah. And so how old was he when he went back to school to get that degree? His second degree then, right?
Yeah, he must have been, at the time, I guess it was probably in his 30s at some point. I don't remember the year he actually started the program. I remember the year that he ended it, though, which was when I graduated high school, was when he graduated with the night school degree.
Oh, okay.
It's a master's degree in computer science. So he would have been about 40 at the time.
Wow.
And then I was graduating high school. Because my parents had me when they were about, I think, 24. They were both the same age. And by the time I was graduating, 18 years later, so would have been like early 40s.
Yeah.
For them. And so, my high school years were more so, I was a little more balanced. I had sports and all the typical subjects, but I was advanced in math. I actually took a math course in 8th grade at the high school that I went to. And eventually that led to, more and more advanced courses like advanced calculus later as a senior, and taking the AP exam it was to get into more advanced courses in college as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do that mostly on the math and science side of things. English and reading were never actually really good subjects for me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I kind of struggled with that. And so, while it may sound like I grew up being some kind of computer genius or something, I had my strengths and weaknesses.
Well, yeah, everybody does, right? There are areas of expertise. And so when did you know that you definitely wanted to continue studying engineering, or that you wanted to, seek that degree?
I mean, I was sort of a dumb kid. Even when I was 18, I didn't know much about the real world and working, professionally.
Well, you can't be faulted for that, though.
So,
I mean, that's pretty common.
I think a lot of us were pretty confused about what we wanted to do and wanted to be.
Yeah, a lot of us still are.
Yeah. So, I knew I wanted to go into something that would be heavy in math and science because I was really interested in those subjects. And since I was so interested in music at the time and I was playing a lot of guitar, I thought I would design amplifiers, microphones,
right on.
audio equipment. And so that was the goal initially that got me into the electrical engineering program. That was at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois.
And you're from, did we mention where you're from, by the way? Did you say?
I don't think I mentioned it, yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Chicago, and, city proper. My entire, my sisters were as well. So my entire family kind of started there. And by the time my last sister was born, the third sister, we headed on out of Chicago into the suburbs, south suburbs, where we also had some family. So my mom's side of the family had kind of settled there. A lot of Italians from like the 30s and 40s who came over. So that was kind of the culture down in the south side of Chicago that I grew up with, was sort of like a deep Italian roots. And my dad's side of the family, who's from California for the most part. Long history there, though. They're from Germany.
Osterholt.
Yeah.
Which means?
Eastern land holding, I'm told, is what it means. And the reason it's Eastern is because it used to be the easternmost part of the Netherlands. And then the German border moved over. Yeah. So it's actually the most western part of Germany, and the farm is still called Osterholt, Eastern Landholding, even though it's in the western part. But they all came over as farmers, and then that business kind of got wiped out over the course of generations, going through like the Dust Bowl and all that stuff. Wow. So later years were sort of less attached to that part of the family line, the business, that started the migration over to the U.S. At least for me, it kind of I feel somewhat detached from it.
You don't have any inclination to be a farmer, or?
Yeah, I mean, other than like my Italian relatives would grow their own tomatoes and make their own tomato sauce, and
in Southern Illinois, or in the suburbs, I mean. Yeah.
So we had a garden growing up. We had basil and tomatoes and garlic and that kind of stuff, and my grandparents would make the sauce for the whole year, and we would can it up.
Yeah, nice.
Had a cellar with wine barrel and
great smells. There must have been great smells in the kitchen at home, right?
Oh yeah, the cooking back then was just incredible, and if I ate that kind of food now, it's just bread, pasta.
It's like 95% carbs, right?
Yeah, as a growing kid, it's great. In high school, playing sports and being athletic, you can down a big plate of
burn
pasta,
it off right
meatballs,
away.
No problem. Nowadays, I don't know if I can handle.
It sticks with you a little longer these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you go to college at Bradley in Peoria, and you're studying. What's your exact major at Bradley?
Electrical engineering is the name of the major. Some people took on I think it was a specialty in computer-based engineering as well. I didn't have that on my degree. I just had the down the middle electrical engineering degree, and I guess the two programs, the one that was more computer centric had more driver development and things like that for PCs. You would do like a PCI Express slot driver project on that track. For me, I was more interested in analog circuits at the time and robotics. So I was doing things in what's called controls, was where I ended up focusing. And my final capstone project was a control system for a robot arm. And so known to be like the slower systems. The computer side of electrical engineering involves more of like the digital electronics and high speed kind of thing that you end up clocking with computer systems that are trying to process information as fast as possible. Whereas what I was doing was more like low frequency stuff in terms of robotics. You have slow moving mechanical arms and that kind of thing, signals that are analog more so than digital. And so I really wanted to focus on that stuff. It just interested me more in terms of physical systems, which was interesting at first, but then there's kind of a longer story that leads to how I ended up actually in my professional career going more toward the path of software and computer science.
Well, so do you finish school in 4 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you finish school and then you don't know that you're going to go into that software engineering route quite yet, right? So what is that path like?
In fact, it was one of my weaker subjects in college. I didn't tend to like software projects as much, even though I had to do a good amount of software, both embedded and also like C++ on these old workstations where we had, I think it was Microsoft Visual C++ at the time. And I just found it to be really clunky and challenging because I didn't know what I was doing. But eventually, the way it worked out, I got a job working for Caterpillar on their R&D team for the backhoe, which is a big machine with a big arm and digs trenches and things like that. Used on construction sites,
Hiding bodies and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Probably.
Chicago. This is Chicago we're talking about.
Yeah. At this point, I was living in Peoria, Illinois.
Oh, okay. So you graduate and then you start working in Peoria. You get your first job there.
Yeah, exactly.
For Caterpillar.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, actually, my very first job, it was still at Caterpillar because Caterpillar's global headquarters is Peoria, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure a lot of people know that. Yeah, Peoria is a small city. I think it's probably still around 100,000 people, but has Caterpillar as this huge company. The Illinois and the Midwestern region are kind of known for agriculture as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's my homeland as well.
Exactly. So yeah, Iowa, Illinois, these kinds of places. You have John Deere over there. You have a lot of these agriculture-based machines. Caterpillar also produces some of those. So yeah, in the heartland, in the middle of Illinois, there's this enormous company, and they have a lot of opportunity down there for people who graduate with engineering degrees. But at the time, the job market wasn't so great. So my first job, actually for a few months, was as a technician, walking around engine. They were Caterpillar engine labs, these big rooms with their engines, prototypes, with features that haven't been shipped yet, and they're testing everything about the engine running through simulations. And so I would walk around and like change filters and make sure the equipment was operating properly, calibrating machines with various like gas lines and things that were being used to simulate various conditions in the environment and that kind of stuff. So I did that for a couple months and kind of got my foot in the door at Caterpillar and kind of saw my way around the company a little more, got experience hands-on with their engines and some of their machines. And then a friend of mine reached out, someone who I'd met in the labs, actually. He was a TA in our electrical engineering labs, and I kind of got to know him better through that, and we became friends who talked a little bit, after school, and he ended up being a manager at this place called Belcan Engineering. It's actually a pretty well-known company that has multiple locations, and they do a lot of aerospace work as well. But they typically do consulting for various companies. Caterpillar's one of them, and they're stationed in Peoria for that reason. So he sends me an email and says, "Hey, we actually have an opening here. I haven't forgotten about you." And that was my first engineering job.
Yeah, right on.
So yeah, he got me in the door, and it was a lot of people I went to school with.
Really?
That worked at this place.
Had he done that for a number of people? That was your TA had been sort of a networking.
Oh, definitely.
Fella.
Yeah, because Bradley University is right there by Caterpillar.
Oh, sure.
So there are lots of relationships. A lot of interconnected people between the school and people working in the field, and a lot of the time, you'll come across people who do internships, who also get their friends in the door when they have an opening that they know about. They'll grab resumes from friends they graduated with at Bradley, and I was one of those people who just had a network of friends who had already graduated, and I was doing this sort of dirty, night shift job, replacing filters and stuff, just kind of trying to get my feet wet a little bit.
Yeah.
And sure enough, had a friend in the network that reaches out, and I ended up interviewing with people that I knew who were just a year ahead of me, and that was my first boss in engineering. Was this guy Matt that I knew from projects when I was a junior. He was a senior, and so I actually came in and said, "Hey, I know you. We actually talked at the expo where you had your capstone project, and I was interested in your project and asking questions, and
makes the interview process a little less nerve-wracking, right? Then when you know the person already,
yeah,
takes some pressure off.
Yeah, I mean, familiar faces were everywhere in that office, so yeah, it was very low pressure at that point. Of course, some new people that I met that didn't go to Bradley. We had engineers from around the world, different places. So yeah.
So how long do you end up staying at Caterpillar, or living and working in Peoria?
It was a couple of years. I had a girlfriend at the time that couldn't easily find a job as a teacher in the area. And so it finally got to a point where the opportunities that she was receiving were in Chicago. And so what actually happened is I ended up still working for Belcan after we moved to Chicago. So I did some remote work there for a little bit because I was still on some projects that were, these projects are never finished, these R&D projects. So, I moved to Chicago so that my girlfriend could get a job, and then I was kind of working remotely, agreed to do it part-time, and at the time took an opportunity to go back to school for software because so much of the job was software.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't very good at it. So I was like dying to get a better education in it because I knew I was going to be continually asked to do more and more software in the field. Yeah. It was just taking over. You can imagine doing a little bit of hardware engineering, and there certainly is circuit design and that kind of thing. You can go down that path and focus on it. But if you're in the field now in technology anywhere, I'm assuming you're going to run into some software at some point. So it was a good decision, I think, on my part to go back to school and get a degree in software engineering.
Master's?
That. Yeah. So I applied to DePaul University, and my degree as an electrical engineer and some of my work experience allowed me to just get accepted right away based on that criteria. So it was like a really easy in, too. I didn't have to take tests or any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's
that
nice.
A lot of people
no GREs and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was.
And maybe was the company helping pay the tuition?
Not Belcan at the time, but I ended up quitting that job and kind of going out of work for a little bit and just focusing on the degree. But I was only able to do that for maybe about 6 months before running out of money.
Yeah.
Chicago was much more expensive than Peoria.
And you're renting, the rent's higher.
Yeah.
Cost of living.
It's funny thinking about that rent now because it actually doesn't sound that high anymore.
Yeah.
It was like $13.50 a month.
Uh-huh. For what kind of place?
It was on Dearborn in Chicago. Really nice
area.
Oh,
yeah.
Called the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful area. And, these apartments weren't known as the highest end apartments in the area. So it was, I think the address was 1100 Dearborn. I think the building is still there. The management might have changed a little bit. I think they may have re-renovated since then, but
you're almost downtown Chicago, basically.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good rent at the time.
Pretty close to the Red Line, so I was able to hop on the Red Line and go downtown, actual downtown, where the DePaul, I think it was the School of, I want to say Communications and Technology. I forgot the exact name of it, but it was their technology school.
How long is the program? So 2 years, I'm assuming, for the master's?
Well, for me, it was night school.
Yeah, okay, so a little longer.
Yeah, I had to pace it out a
Yeah.
little more. And so you could probably get it done in 2 years if someone wanted to.
Focusing full time, though,
Yeah.
or you'd really kill yourself, right? Going, working, and that's a lot of work.
When I went back to work, I found a job at this place called WMS Gaming at the time. They've since then been bought by Scientific Games, and there was a merger, and so now the name is Scientific Games. But yeah, in Chicago, it's a well-known slot machine gambling industry gaming company that produces a lot of the games for a lot of different jurisdictions, but Vegas especially. Since we're in Nevada now, might as well bring up what this was about. And so, so I ended up getting that job because we were basically running out of money. And so I had to cut down school to part-time. But this job actually did have an education program. So they actually paid for most of the classes after I ended up, working full-time for them and continuing school. So it took another couple years to finish school. I actually started that job in 2008 and finished school in 2011.
So is that the first job you had where you would call yourself a software engineer?
It was my very first software title. Yeah.
Okay.
And I started at the bottom of that food chain. It was like software engineer, I think was the title at the time. I think they may have changed it after this, but there were certain levels to it that you could graduate to. Software engineer was, associate, that was it. Associate software engineer was the first. And then I ended up getting promoted up that ladder, pretty much in sequence. So I went from that to what they call a core engineer, and then from core to senior. And then there's a decision point where you choose leadership or,
fellowship,
individual contribution. So you could either become a principal at that point and just do more engineering work, or a leadership role. I chose the leadership path, and so ended up becoming a lead software engineer. Yeah.
Right on. So how long do you stick with that position at that company? What was the name of the company at that time?
It was WMS Gaming.
WMS.
For my first 4 or 5 years there. And then the Scientific Games merger happened.
Oh, that happened while you were working?
About a year before I left. I did a total of about 6 years there. And
so you finish around 2012, 13?
Yeah, I think it was 2012 when I was finalizing that role. It was just time for something different. Had that girlfriend I mentioned, we broke up, and then I went off on my own, lived at an apartment in Chicago. At the time, I was in Roscoe Village, so we didn't stay in the Gold Coast that long. We moved out to Roscoe Village, and yeah, it was a little more, I'd say, more of a settling down kind of area instead of
Kind of close to Wrigley Field in that zone for people who don't know.
yeah, exactly, a little west of there. And WMS Gaming was walkable, so I would actually walk to work, and yeah, just that walk every morning kind of woke me up, and it was just nice to work really close to where I lived in Chicago. I didn't have to own a car.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I took public transit a lot, which comes into play later with a future job. But yeah, worked there about 6 years. Actually, that's my longest held position at any company so far. Was this 6 year stretch with WMS Gaming, and then at the very end, in my last year or so, it was called Scientific Games. Yeah.
Okay, so you leave there because it's time for something new. Basically, you were looking for a change, and then were you just looking for a change into a different engineering role, or are we talking about a bigger life change?
Yeah, at the time it was kind of like I just needed a break from the business, because there were a lot of things that were just kind of jumbling it up a bit in terms of changes, and Scientific Games taking over might have had something to do with that. But the platform that I was so used to and had worked on for many years was transitioning to something completely new. And so it just kind of felt like a good time to take a break from that and figure something else out. And at the time, my sister was teaching English in Korea, and I went to visit her and just had a great time with her there. And she explained the whole deal. And to me, it just sounded like an interesting, sabbatical project.
Adventure.
Yeah. And so since I enjoyed it so much and was already thinking about making a big change, I decided to try doing a year in Korea. And that ended up being kind of a whole new ordeal.
And this is where you and I met.
Yeah.
And where we became friends, because I was working at this school in Seoul, teaching adults one-to-one, helping them improve their English language skills, and meet all their educational goals, and try and get promotions and land new jobs, and prepare them to travel abroad and stuff like that. And then you joined the school, and so we became colleagues and pretty fast friends. I think we had some things in common. And then how did that experience? Tell me about your Seoul adventure.
Yeah, it kind of started actually before even moving there, which was part of the interesting aspect of working in Korea is the process to actually get the job. And so it kind of starts there where I had quit my job. So I was out of work because I was starting the CELTA program, which is a English as a second language certificate program. And they have this in Chicago at a place called Teaching House, which was a really interesting experience. But all the while you are lining up roles, doing research, trying to figure out, which school do I want to work for and where. And
do I want to teach kids or middle high schoolers or adults and that sort of thing?
Exactly. So yeah, I was pretty sure I wanted to do adults. Didn't know if I could handle the kids programs.
Yeah.
My sister did, and when I visited, I got to see that live in action.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a lot of kids in a room, my sister basically struggling to survive.
Yeah. I did that for a while in Korea, and it's fun, but oftentimes you just want to tear your hair out.
I bet, yeah. So yeah, I decided adults one-on-one would be perfect, and ended up finding a job at a place called Language Cube. That's where I met you. And management there seemed pretty nice. The location seemed really nice. The one in Gangnam where we worked.
Yeah, great location. Apgujeong, Gangnam.
Yeah.
Lots of plastic surgery happening in the area.
That's right.
So a lot of our students were plastic surgeons, actually, or at least some of mine were.
Yeah, I had some.
Yeah.
I had a lot in the fashion industry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the time I finally got the visa, I was on a road trip with my sister. Got the visa, had to hurry home from Colorado to get the stamp because the job was going to start. I think it was in late August, and so we were on this big long road trip. Booked it home, back to Chicago where there's a consulate. Got the stamp, and then within a week I was like packed and on my way out. And it was like monsoon season, so I land in Korea. I used to describe this as feeling a lot like the Terminator when he kind of drops it with that ball, and he kind of like wakes up and is like, where am I? And doesn't know you have to wear clothes.
But you were clothed, right, when you arrived?
Yeah,
you arrived in clothes. That's always a good start.
Just like a new world, right?
Yeah.
You're dropped into a new language, a new system. Everything is totally different, and you have like no friends yet. You have contacts with the school, and so
because your sister was still in Korea, was she? Oh, she had left by that point.
She was back. She only did a year and came back, and that's the sister I was on the road trip with.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So she knew the deal when we were on the road, and I was actually interviewing on the road. So I had my laptop with me, and I would do these Zoom calls, and I had a couple of interviews with different schools, and this just happened to be the one that sounded like the right fit. So it was, that was the decision on the road. Filled out all my paperwork on the road in California at the time. We were driving around the country. And then when I finally got the role and the visa number and everything came together, we were in Colorado, actually visiting two of her friends that also taught in Korea that she met there. So, a lot of connections along the way, but got back, flew out to Korea, and I just remember there was a taxi driver that took me to my new house, and he pointed over and said, okay, so you want to meet James, he lives over there.
Okay.
And
but your apartment was basically right across the street from mine. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, your apartment that didn't have a bathroom sink, was it?
Yeah, there was no sink in the bathroom. It was impossible to install one.
Impossible.
So what was that, because it's such a big transition moving from being a software engineer to then being a language teacher, right? I mean, everything was new about Seoul for you. From the geography to the type of work. So what did you think about your life as a teacher? Did you enjoy teaching? Was it a struggle to get used to it, or did you take to it right away? Or
I think it was a mix of like good times and hard times. Like with teaching, it was, for me, I thought it would be more natural than it was. It turned out feeling a lot less natural than I thought it would end up being.
Did you feel like the CELTA program prepared you for it?
Not really. I think the CELTA program has a lot of good concepts in it. Of course, it prepared me for a lot of the things, a lot of the challenges that would be coming my way. But the CELTA program has its very own regimented structure in terms of how teaching a class works and how it operates. So there are actual CELTA English teaching programs out there that follow the same schematic, right, or the same design, the approach to the class and how it works. Whereas at the Language Cube, none of that applied. The structure of the classes was totally different. The curriculum, the books that they used. So all the different levels that you had to teach at throughout the day, one-on-one, had the challenge of, if someone comes in and wants to learn about something that you aren't really an expert in, you have to somehow be able to manage that and simulate it. I remember one time a doctor came in and wanted me to
operate.
Yeah, play a game of Operation.
Yeah.
No, they wanted me to read off of the script of House, the show,
Yeah.
and play the different characters, and then speak to some of the words in the script as in medical expertise.
Yeah.
This is not something I could pull off, right?
Without a little preparation. Yeah.
Well, even then, you're not a doctor. You're not
Right.
going to be able to teach someone how to use doctor English speak, in a way that they would want to in, let's say, a hospital in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
If they were going to transfer to a hospital where English is the natural language, sure, it's English, but you're going to have to know all the vocabulary for your specific field.
Yeah, all the jargon of whatever their field is.
Yeah.
Not just the ripped out of house kind of language. Right? I need 50 cc's of, oxycodone, stat.
Yeah. And all the sarcastic jokes within the script.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Dr. House. That Dr. House was a real sarcastic fella.
So I'm not so sure that would have applied in an actual hospital setting.
Yeah, maybe not so useful. But yeah, that is a good point. That you do have to. We had doctors and people in the fashion industry, and you had to maybe kind of quickly learn on your feet how to use these new vocabularies to teach different levels of students and different occupations, right?
Exactly, and the learning was very much on my side. I liked the fact that it was adults one-on-one because a lot of the conversations were more personal stories about their lives. And so I was able to capture a lot of the cultural differences and learn more about the people there just
in
through
the country
conversation. And that's often what the class was, just having conversations with these people.
You learn more from them than they learn from you, right?
I want to say that's true.
Yeah.
I think the immersion experience for them is a good thing because they speak with Native American speakers of English, and that helps them kind of grow their abilities in the environment where they're faced with, let's say, an all English speaking meeting or something like that. That was often the case. A lot of the people that took these courses were doing business internationally and needed to do phone calls.
Yeah.
I remember the phone call lessons being kind of funny, where you'd have on your schedule someone, it was a call, and there would be a phone number there, and there were certain methods to it where you could have a certain conversation that was already kind of choreographed, but it was kind of like acting. And acting over the phone, and that was kind of interesting too. These people, some of them wanted to talk about a certain subject. They wanted to ask me about engineering and some of my experiences back home, and so that was perfectly...
Did you have any engineering students at Language Cube?
Yeah. I remember I had one guy was a computer programmer at Riot Games. They had an office right nearby in Apgujeong, which is a company I was familiar with, who I think is based around LA. I'm not sure exactly where.
So you signed a one-year contract for this teaching job in Seoul, right? And how did it pan out?
Well, it wasn't going that well toward maybe my 6th or 7th month into it because I had a manager who, for whatever reason would threaten to fire you probably once or twice a week. And at one point, I think I got written up for something. I really wish I had taken a picture of this write-up. It had some interesting verbiage in it. But I just remember thinking, okay, if there's a real chance that these people are actually going to intimidate in a way that's threatening my role here, I don't necessarily want to continue forward with it with this hanging over my head,
So it wasn't a good fit with the work culture in that, at least in that institute, right? At that position.
I would say so, yeah. I think it also really changed when the management switched over. They had a new manager there who, to me, seemed less experienced as a manager. Didn't really...
A little trigger happy with the threats to
Yeah.
to fire people.
Yeah, it might have been just the method of intimidation to get you to try to be better at your job.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, even the policies of the school that were in the contracts that the students were signing, she wasn't, the manager there, wasn't actually following those rules.
Mm-hmm.
It was just more of a regime of the teacher's always wrong, the student's always right,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I didn't really mind the pressure. I think it just ended up being difficult to plan for, because I think I wanted my sister to come out and visit, and she was going to plan for a couple months down the road. And it seemed like there was actually a real chance. This is where it gets tricky: is, are they really going to fire me, or is all of this just a game?
Yeah.
Like, because if I'm really going to get fired, and I'm going to have people wanting to come here and travel out here, and I'm not going to be able to stay because my visa is beholden to this company.
Yeah.
Well, now you have to make a decision. Are you going to stick around and try to work through it, or just make the plans to leave, know when you're going to leave, have everything planned out? And I chose the plan.
Yeah. So get out. So you gave your letter of resignation, right? Was it like a 2-month notice or something like that?
Yeah, the policy there was 2 months notice.
Yeah.
So once I actually put in that notice, everything got a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a weight lifted off your shoulders, right?
Well, also management stopped threatening to fire.
Yeah, what would be the point? Yeah.
So
I mean, a lot, but a credit to you for following that policy, because I know I worked in Korea for a number of years and had the experience of people leaving just in the dead of night. They didn't like the job for whatever reason, and then basically disappeared without ever really formally, resigning. So good for you. You did it the right way.
I also didn't want to leave. I was enjoying life outside of work.
Yeah.
I enjoyed a lot of the work too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people were very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It just ended up coming down to my relationship with the management at the school. It wasn't a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually really smooth after putting in that notice. So my last 2 months was really enjoyable.
So you end up living in Korea for about 8 months, is that right?
Yeah, turned out to be almost exactly 8 months.
Okay.
And then I flew back to New Jersey, stayed with my sister for a while. And I was kind of bouncing around, traveling a bit, seeing family again. And I had this decision to make to move to a place where I had met a new lady friend in Korea, and we were putting some plans together. She wanted to go to school for cooking, and I think already had a relationship with Le Cordon Bleu, and they had various locations worldwide. So going abroad and learning how to cook somewhere, I realized there was a school in Portland, Oregon, which is a place that I really enjoyed. In my Chicago years, visiting Portland where my cousin lived, and so I had already kind of had it in my mind that like the Northwest would be a great place to live after Korea, and
good work opportunities for you out there as well.
Yeah.
What were you thinking in terms of work at that time? Were you thinking now I want to get back into software engineering?
Yeah, I think I had it kind of it was already in my mind that I would be going back into some technology-related field, and
that was part of the Portland decision, right? There's a burgeoning industry there, or already existent.
Yeah, they called it at the time. There was a nickname, Silicon Forest.
Oh, okay.
Because Portland is known for its green, sort of natural environment with lots of trees and greenery.
Forestry.
There's actually a forest in the middle of the city. It's called Forest Park. We actually hiked there once. Yeah. So it's one of those unique things about the Northwest is all the nature, and Seattle has, I think, the only rainforest in the United States, if I remember correctly. So a lot of volcanoes, and Mount St. Helens is up there, the Cascades, just interesting terrain. And some people don't like the weather so much in the wintertime, but for me, like the culture there, the beer, the
coffee
food
culture,
scene,
yeah.
it's all very very relaxed too. Very chill place. So I always like the Northwest.
So you make the move out to the Pacific Northwest, and then you're joined later, right, by your girlfriend at the time.
Yeah. So so she arrives a little later. I had already found a job with a company called Immersive Media at the time. Immersive Media was really small when I joined. It was intellectual property that was bought by a couple of employees that had worked there, and they spun off into a company that created VR experiences, virtual reality with iOS and Android. And I wanted to do something in iOS because I had programmed a lot of iPhone apps early on, in the early days of the iPhone, but I'd never taken a professional turn doing apps. It was something I did on the side, and I had done a couple of freelance jobs with apps before, but I wanted to get a job where it was the main thing I was doing was developing iPhone apps. Of course, you don't really get away with only focusing on the Apple products when you go into that field, because for every iPhone app, there's usually an Android app to go with it. So of course I had to learn how to use Android Studio as well, and develop skills doing that. So I had this job making apps, and I was one of the first app developers at the company. So I was basically like employee number maybe 10 or so. And in terms of people programming apps, it was like me and one other guy who quit. And then I took over his part of the job as well. And so I kind of ended up being the sole app developer, aside from our VP of engineering, which was one of the founding members. And so, yeah, very tight-knit, just small office setup where we were making what's called white label apps, meaning we develop the app, but it's branded for somebody else. My first one was for NBC Universal, and it was a Google Cardboard VR experience for the show The Expanse. So The Expanse was, the first season was just launching, and they had an event at Comic-Con coming up where they were going to hand out these VR headsets, Google Cardboard, and have the app ready to go so that you could experience some of the spaceships and things like that in this VR experience. And so that was my first job in Portland, was developing that app. And that was actually as an independent contractor. So I wasn't actually working full-time for the company yet, but that would come later after I finished that app and successfully delivered it for NBC Universal. And they decided to hire me on full-time after that.
Yeah, why wouldn't they? Yeah. So they hire you full-time. How long do you stay with that company?
That ended up being, I think, a little more than 3 years. And that evolved very fast into something completely different than simply developing apps.
Are you also taking on leadership roles then in that company later on?
Yeah, what happened was they ended up getting acquired by a company called Digital Domain. And this new funding came in from the Digital Domain buyout. And with that funding, we were to expand. And so I ended up, as one of the early developers on the team, I ended up being a big part of the hiring process for a bigger team that would develop more, I would say, variety in terms of products. We had a platform for VR that was streaming live video content. We had cameras that a hardware arm of the business was building, and so we had to build the camera software systems that ingested all the raw data and converted that into a VR experience. So So the job quickly became something completely different because no longer was it all about just building these apps for other companies. It became building a platform that under the digital domain umbrella was going to be like this big VR platform that we would deliver and do live shows with. The company was pretty well known for VR, even though VR was kind of a niche. So, like one of the projects we had as a company was the Conan O'Brien show. A lot of people may not even know there was a VR experience for Conan, but
news to me.
Yeah, they recorded a lot of shows in 360 video with the cameras from this company, and so projects like that were the signature of the company, basically doing live events. I think I remember we did the Nobel Prize, we did the Olympics in 2016 in Rio. So the camera systems that were used at these events were camera systems that me and my team were developing. And so while we were developing those new systems, the apps, white label apps and things like that kind of moved over to a different department.
Fell by the wayside. Yeah, in your department. Okay.
It was actually Digital Domain in LA. They actually took on the app side work. And so a new app was launched, an app that worked on the live platform. And so it became a little bit of a different experience for customers. It became more of like a live experience. And so that transition led me to become the director of a software team. And I actually directed multiple teams, quality assurance, the digital art and design team, as well as the core software engineering team. We kind of broke that down into graphics and core service because we had a web app. And so we had web developers that were more interested in JavaScript and web front end and also databases and back end. So I was managing a wide variety of different fields at that point. And that only took about 2 years to develop. So it started with just making apps for NBC Universal, the New York Times, and a couple of other interesting customers of the white label experience. Went from that very quickly to just me making apps on my own to suddenly me managing a team of 15 people, including myself, and a whole different variety of technology that was being delivered to customers. So I did a lot of traveling for that role as well, because we were selling the systems to other customers, and so I got to travel to Israel,
worldwide,
a lot of other places within the U.S. as well. So some new experiences there.
Cool.
But yeah, that lasted about 3 years, and I think we ended up shutting down that side of the business. This was, I think, around 2018 timeframe. A lot of things in the economy were shifting because back then we were going through another Federal Reserve rate hike cycle, and so I remember that being the case, as well as quantitative tightening. So there was like a tightening of economic conditions. And I think VR was especially like kind of victim to that a little bit because it required a lot of growth funding. And so there were a lot of like venture capital dollars going into all these various VR projects. But when that happens so quickly, it tends to contract as well when the business cycle takes over. And so we were part of that contraction. And I ended up like shutting down that office. Being one of the last people there. Not that the company like folded or anything. They're still operating Digital Domain out of LA. But in terms of the Portland office, that whole thing kind of sunset. And so that was the end of that role.
So then you're looking for something new, and did you want to stay in Portland, or were you open to, moving elsewhere, or?
At the time, I Yeah, I wasn't planning on moving out of Portland, so I looked in Portland for a new role, and ended up coming across a company named Movil, North America, and Movil is a brand out of Germany, but the company started in Portland as a small shop making public transit apps, and I think it started with TriMet, which is the public transit agency in Portland. And so the ticketing system that I had used before living in Portland, I was familiar with it. Ended up finding out about this company that actually made the app is from Portland, and ended up interviewing there and finding a job right as I transitioned out of immersive media, or digital domain at the time. No days off, just had a weekend and then started a new role.
Oh man, yeah, that's intense.
Yeah, it was a little bit, especially since we were living a little further away. Because Immersive Media's office was actually in Washington, across the river.
Yeah.
So we had.
So you're commuting into Washington State suddenly to go to work. Yeah.
And we had relocated to be more, to keep the commute to a minimum to Washington. We were a little further away from Portland city center. So when I got this new job, which was in the city center, I suddenly had a really long commute downtown. So for a while it was kind of intense, like getting up pretty early and taking the bus because we had one car and had to use the app that I was suddenly a part of.
It's good practice.
Yeah, quite extensively. And it was a good job though. I really liked that office. It was a lot of fun. Really fun group to work with.
So how long do you work with Movil?
Yeah, that ended up being probably 1 year and about 8 months was the duration. So I started as an iOS developer, senior iOS developer on a team that made the mobile transit app. And it's an app platform, so many agencies adopt this white label framework, and we rebrand it for each app, for each agency. And so I started off that way, just focusing on iOS development. What was really cool about that job was it was focused in the Swift language, which was relatively new at the time. I mean, Swift came around in 2014 when I was in Korea, and I had learned about it then, but I hadn't really used it extensively, and I used it a little bit for a side project app while I was at Immersive Media. But the company adopted Swift and this more modernized platform. So it was a cool aspect of the job, and that's where I really got to learn and dig in more into the iOS side of things and focus strictly on that. All native development on iOS. And we had an Android counterpart team as well, because the app had to have the exact same feature set across the platforms. And there was a services team that interfaced into the back end. And so that job evolved into a management role again, because our manager had left and the team was going to split into 2 teams. And so there was this call for, candidates for manager of the new team after the split. And I remember for a while I was kind of standoffish about it. I didn't really want initially to try for that role. But later on I just decided, since we were interviewing a few candidates and it just didn't seem like we were finding the right person for it, it seemed like an opportunity I should just give it a go.
Were you a part of that interview process?
Yeah.
You were helping to interview the candidates?
Yeah.
And they were all losers. So you raised your hand. You said, "I'll do it."
Yeah. At the time, it just seemed like we really needed someone who knew their way around the app and the infrastructure. And so while I didn't necessarily want to, the challenge with moving into managerial aspects, coming from individual contribution, there are a couple of major challenges with it. One of them is you suddenly become the boss of your previous peers.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of
awkward.
Kind of
I
awkward
assume, yeah.
because you can't necessarily be friends with people that you manage
Right.
anymore. It's sort of a more directly professional relationship that has to mature out of that. So that was one of the challenges. The other challenge is you lose focus on the contribution work that you were doing. And I remember thinking at the time that it would be good for me to continue to learn more iOS development and just stick to that as a career choice. Because you get rusty programming once you go into management and you stop programming as much.
Sure.
You get rusty, you lose your skill set.
Sure.
Next thing you know, your skills are out of date. You go to a job interview and you're asked to program a little snippet of code or something, and you're using old languages, and people are kind of mocking you for like, not being with the times anymore.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing can be disruptive in your career.
Yeah.
So
unless you continue on with managerial roles, I assume, yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to stay in management, there's always opportunity there too. So it's a challenging decision that people have to make. If you want to become a manager, you have to make sacrifices. You won't be able to program as much, be down in the details as much anymore. And so that was one of the things I was struggling with, but I just decided to go for it anyway, since we needed it so bad. And turned out, I went through the exact interview process that everyone else did, and turned out that everyone liked the idea of me taking over that role as a manager, so I did. And did that for a number of months until I was approached by a recruiter from Apple, and that's when things started down the path of doing an interview process with Apple and eventually taking a role in Silicon Valley.
Okay, yeah. So you move over to Apple, and how long was that interview process? How much time did it take?
Oh, this one was interesting. So it started with a few phone calls, and I guess the whole thing, if you're asking how long was the total process?
Yeah, just from beginning to the first day of work, basically.
Yeah, I want to say it was about 5 months or so. So I'm working at Movil the whole time.
Yeah.
And yeah, 5 months go by where I'm doing calls with people at Apple. Eventually I had an on-site interview. That was toward the end of the process, but what ended up happening, I think, was they had an internal applicant as well that came in at the time, and so I was sort of put on hold for a little while.
Yeah.
And so even though I had already done an interview down in Cupertino, I had to wait quite a while for a response.
And what was the position that you were interviewing for there, and then eventually ended up taking on?
Yeah, it was an engineering manager role in an iOS app. So this was the first time I had applied to a new company going directly into management. So it was a bit of a different experience for me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the interviews I had done prior to that were for the individual contribution role,
Right.
where I would have to show off my coding skills and talk about architectures and actual software engineering concepts.
Yeah.
Going into a management interview for the first time was actually kind of interesting. Actually, at Movil, like I said, I did interview for the manager role.
But you started somewhere else.
Well, I started at Movil
Yeah.
as a contributor.
Right.
And so the transition into management, that's how I had done it at
Yeah.
previous companies.
Yeah.
This was, the first time that I would be going directly into a management role. So that was a bit different.
So Apple is lucky to get you in this management role. And for a lot of people, they hear that you worked at Apple and they think, oh man, that must have been awesome. Like that's a dream job destination, a dream company to work for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are a lot of challenges when you work for a company of that size, and
Yeah.
reputation and so on. So what are some of the challenges that you faced working there?
Yeah, one of the challenges is very related to this podcast right here because there's a lot of confidentiality that you have to take on when you work at a company that has innovation and IP that can't be disclosed.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually wearing the T-shirt that I bought down at Infinite Loop. They sell these. I think they still have this shirt with the emoji with the zipper over the mouth. Because a lot of what I worked on, I'm unable to talk about. So that's one of the challenges. I always like being open about my work and talking to people about it. And of course, your family always wants to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You end up at the family dinner table for Thanksgiving or something, and not being able to talk about much of what you're doing. So
you could just make it up, right? I mean, you could just tell people anything.
Yeah, that's
you wouldn't believe what Apple's working on now, right?
Well, even that is considered to be a violation.
Oh, that's off limits?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't even make something up and get people starting rumors about what new technologies are coming down the line. But that was one of the major challenges for me. And I'm sure it's a challenge for other people. Actually, some people like that kind of culture. It's sort of like a secret agent type of, that's what I think of when I think of this kind of, the mode of operation. It's a lot like you feel like you're a part of something secret and important and like maybe secret agent style, kind of like hiding the new technologies that are coming out down the line, and you get to have the first peek at them and be the first to touch some of these new features. And so I think some people really get excited over that. I mean, it's a trade-off. I really enjoyed it. I liked seeing the inside, right? And seeing how the company operates from the inside for the first time. Because unless you work there, you're not going to get much from people who work there in terms of describing the details of how it works.
Yeah, so. Sorry. If you want to know more, you have to get a job at Apple.
That's right. And I'd certainly recommend it for anyone who's always liked Apple products and wants to work there. It's a great place to learn a lot. There's a lot of incredible people there, as you might imagine.
Sure, yeah.
The kind of experience that I got there was very unique and interesting. For many different reasons. And some of the reasons aren't good reasons. And one of those was the pandemic.
Because you start there in 2018, is that right? Or 2019?
2019.
And then at what month did you start?
November.
You started in November of 2019. So just within the next 6 months, the pandemic is in the US. And you start then on campus, but pretty quickly I imagine you're working from home, right?
Right, yeah. It was a pretty wild experience moving and then having maybe like a few months to get situated and then meet the people and kind of start to wrap my head around the projects and get a feel for how the office worked. And we actually moved offices too. So like within the first month and a half or so, I got used to one office and then we moved completely to another office.
And then into your home office.
I didn't even really unpack. By the time the pandemic hit the U.S., it was already a thing in Asia, and I kind of knew it would likely come over to the States as well. And I remember being in.
How did you know? Was that an Apple thing? Was that something everyone at Apple already knew before the rest of the Americans?
No, I mean I couldn't guarantee it, but I had a feeling just based on how it was spreading so quickly through Europe and how they weren't really shutting down flights from China. And so I kind of felt like, well, if they're letting people fly around the world and this thing is super contagious, it's probably going to make its way here at some point. And then they had the whole debacle with the cruise liners that were coming in to the Bay. And they were quarantined offshore. But shortly after that, we had cases on the ground in Santa Clara County, and that's where a lot of the Bay Area companies are. So policies started to kick in. Local governments started to, require the mask mandates. We had extra cleaning crews. Like there was all kinds of new stuff going on. For a little while, we were still at the office until finally there was an announcement saying, if you can work from home, please do so, just to be safe. And that's when I went remote from a house that we were renting in San Jose that we had just moved to from Portland. So paying Silicon Valley rents and working out of a home office for about the next, I guess it was definitely over a year. So year and a half before people started to actually like come back to the office again for whatever reason. So a lot of things changed. And I think it was a new thing for a lot of people, even people who had been there a long time. So for me, it was just kind of the new normal.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't really gotten used to working at the office very long.
Right.
By the time we were all kicked out remote. So, we started working remotely. I just continued on with the projects and did everything through Zoom, WebEx, those conferencing apps. So, yeah, that was a new experience for everyone there, and so we had to kind of adapt quickly and tried to maintain our project cycles.
Yeah.
Apple's on a pretty people that are into Apple products will know this, but a lot of people may not know that there's a pretty strict cycle. You usually see a new iPhone in the fall. And there's all sorts of new software with features that correspond to the new features on that phone. And my team was in video apps, and so the camera often is one of the things that the phone gets upgrades in terms of feature set. So with the new camera features comes new video features, comes new video app features, and so our team was always responsible for something new coming down the line. And since the cycle is already so regimented, and these disruptions were happening with COVID, it was difficult to stay on track. And so that was challenging in a whole new way that I had never experienced before, that many people probably never had an experience with, because it's a pandemic. And a pandemic on that magnitude, had only come around 100 years prior, right?
Yeah.
Like the 1920 Spanish flu.
And nobody was working from Zoom.
Yeah.
Conference calls over Zoom were not happening back then.
Right.
So by the time, do you ever end up going back to the office at Apple?
Yeah, for a little bit toward the end. I ended up doing 2.5 years at Apple, and toward the end, it was there was a return to office program starting. Don't really have to go into too many details over like how that was going to work, but by that time, I had already decided to resign because of some new opportunities for me and my wife, who has parents in Malaysia, and her dad operates a factory in Malaysia, has been there for like 40 years, and had asked us to maybe help out with some of the operations there. And so having gone through the pandemic and realizing that like being kind of stuck away from family for a long time was not something we wanted to deal with for many more years, and just seeing that there was this opportunity to move abroad again and go somewhere much different, but also be closer to my wife's family. Seemed like a good opportunity to take at the time, and so that was how I ended up transitioning out of Apple by the time they were returning to the office. And so we're still here in the States. But we have our visas ready to go.
So you will be leaving for Malaysia within, maybe 2 months?
Yeah, it might be. Well, I have my flight now. So.
You have your seat picked out?
Yes.
Window, aisle?
I think it's a mixture. I mostly like the aisle seat.
Okay. Yeah, so do I. It's just on those long flights, if you have to get up and use the
Yeah.
bathroom, you're right there. You don't have to climb over anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually prefer that,
Yeah.
especially on the longer international flights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got your flight purchased already for Malaysia, and the visa is all taken care of, basically, right? And I
Yeah. Late May is when I'll be out there.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have another big life kind of transition coming up, which is really exciting. And then from the time, so when did you leave Apple exactly?
I think my last day was April 20 something, 22nd, I think was the date.
Of
22.
2022, yeah. So
Yeah.
so now it's been about a year,
Yeah.
right, since you left. And you know, when you're going to make a big move abroad, there's a lot to do to prepare for. I know that you moved out of California since that time, right? And you've been doing a lot of things. And I understand you've written a book. Is that right?
Yeah, well,
Or you're putting the finishing touches on a book.
yeah, it's an idea I had. It wasn't a plan of mine to do something like this initially, but having left the job and started to transition out of California and go back to visiting family again, and just kind of had some time to clear my head, and had this idea because I'd been investing in and dabbling in the technology around blockchain for such a long time that I realized, you know, at this point, I have a lot of experience in this, and there are a lot of newcomers to the field of getting into Bitcoin and blockchain in general. So I decided to start putting my history of it down into a book format, and ended up realizing, yeah, I probably have a book's worth of content here if I talk about the history of money and the history of technology and how the two are kind of converging now to bring us this new digital money. And so I started formulating the chapters and then the structure of the book, and filled it out and just kind of typed away for a couple months, and I had a draft that seemed like it was coming together, that, you know, kind of had the full body of what I was trying to accomplish. And so now at this point, I've filled it out even more and kind of chipped away at just kind of capturing the points that I wanted to make about it. And now it's in the editing process. And you would know this since you're the contract editor.
Yeah. So I'm editing this book for you, and so of course I've read it, and I think it's fascinating. And you have you know, so much experience to draw from, and a lot of investment experience with Bitcoin and other coins that I imagine you hope will be instructive to other people, right, who might want to invest in.
Yeah, or are just going to experience it because
it'll just be a part of their lives.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, technology ends up doing that. It just starts to take over parts of industries where its efficiency, efficiency tends to be part of it, or if it's easier to use, or if it is economically more appropriate in a situation, it'll tend to take over that part of an industry. And so, like, one good example is retail, where, you know, Amazon came up with this online store concept, and the next thing you know, bookstores are disappearing.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of an example that I go through in the book that talks about how this new form of money could eventually give us technologies that start to replace things that have been around for a long time in the traditional system. So yeah, it's an interesting journey where I talk about, you know, my life being someone who grew up before the internet really took off, and getting the experience of kind of growing up with technology itself into the internet age,
right,
and then eventually into the age of Bitcoin and, you know, what we're dealing with now with digital money.
And you were a fairly early adopter of it, or early investor in Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, because my dad had mentioned it at a dinner, a family dinner in 2011. And I didn't know what it was, but I was getting more interested in economics because we had the whole 2008
Yeah.
GFC, global financial crisis, which led to Occupy Wall Street and those movements. And so it just caught the attention. It was the zeitgeist, right? It just kind of caught the attention of a lot of people that we were suddenly going through these unprecedented economic times. And so it made me more aware of it, but also it made me aware of how dumb I was in terms of economics and money, because I had just kind of taken all that for granted as I focused more in technology and never really had to think about the economic side of the equation. Got me interested and fascinated in researching concepts around banking, money, fractional reserve banking, that kind of stuff, credit, how that works, and then money in general. So how does Bitcoin fit into all of that? It's designed to be a fixed supply asset. So a lot like a rare metal like gold.
Yeah.
So those aspects of it make it an interesting new technology on the scene that kind of disrupts traditional finance in a lot of ways, and also modern monetary theory, which tends to be a little more expansive in terms of the monetary supply. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of a contender, right, or a competitor to the system that we currently live in. But it can also act as a supplement to an already existing system where we have the internet. The internet doesn't have native money yet, so a lot of that just comes down to adoption. And if people adopt this new technology, it's likely that even people who don't intend to use it, will be using it without even knowing it. And so I think it's something that's good for everyone to have a basic understanding of.
Well, how could they be using it without even knowing it?
Well, it's kind of like when you use your credit card.
Oh, yeah.
You don't really have to know how the money gets transferred around under the hood.
Yeah.
So there are systems now that have been developed where you would use an app like, let's say, kind of like Cash App or Venmo or Apple Pay or one of these interfaces where you just go to a payment system and you pay for something. And on the back end, there might be Bitcoin being transferred. You may not have to even know that. So the technology itself can act as a settlement layer, much like the settlement layers that exist today across banks that you don't have to be aware of when you make a credit card transaction or a purchase with one of these technologies.
Right.
So it's something to think of as more like infrastructure, as opposed to directly interfacing with it and having to actually know all the ins and outs of the technology. You may not have to know, but you might want to have sort of a base understanding of how it all works and why it could be used as that kind of settlement layer, so that you can better understand why this new thing is gaining so much popularity and what's so special about it. Because I feel like a lot of people haven't really haven't been able to find a accessible way of understanding it, and that's sort of what my book intends to do, is provide that accessible, not so technical and deep into the details of the cryptography and how that works. There's already a great book called Mastering Bitcoin. That's by Andreas Antonopoulos. He's one of the original Bitcoiners as well. So I read that really early on when I started getting into cryptocurrencies, and I definitely recommend books like that for people who really want to understand how the layers work. But my book is more about understanding it from the user level and also the conceptual level. Like, why is it even a thing? So I feel like there's still people out there that want to be able to answer that question. Like, why is this thing even? Why does it even have value?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting and complex question.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you do a great job of explaining why that is. And I'm, certainly a novice with things like that. And I've read through the book, and it's helped me to understand. Although I'm, a little bit dense, so I'll have to read it probably a few more times to grasp it. But I mean, a lot of people do have those kinds of questions, right? They don't understand, like, what is Bitcoin, what is blockchain, what are NFTs, right? And they may never get to the bottom of those questions.
Yeah.
But I think your book does do a great job of answering those questions.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, that is definitely one of the goals, and yeah, there's something in there for the technological mindset as well, and there's definitely a lot in there explaining various features of competitors as well. So we have Ethereum, we have other blockchains that have come out with features that have tried to compete with Bitcoin and become the faster or the cheaper Bitcoin or those kinds of concepts. But there's always trade-offs in the technology and the features, and what makes Bitcoin special is part of, I think, the goal of the book as well, is to realize just how elegant of a solution it has been to stand the test of time up until now. For it's a little bit over a decade in use, and it's still going without any major flaws that have caused it to completely disappear yet. And it's also still the #1 cryptocurrency in terms of market cap. It's interesting to see a technology that started a space continue to be dominant, because that's actually very rare.
Sure.
If
you mentioned Tandy earlier, right?
Well, yeah. If you think in terms of like social media,
Oh yeah.
MySpace and Friendster, some of the initial, the firsts are often not the winners in the end.
They'll get replaced.
Yeah.
By the Instagrams and the TikToks and whatever else. Yeah. Well, you also go into pretty good detail about your experience investing, not just learning about Bitcoin and but also investing in Bitcoin and other coins. And for me, it was really fun to read about and kind of go along with you on the highs and lows of of that experience. So where are you at now in terms of investments? Are you continuing to invest in Bitcoin or other coins?
Yeah, well, a lot of the reasoning around getting into it and investing in it has been, for me at least, to experience the technology and really try to use it practically so that I can get the real experience. And so there's no way to do that without investing in it.
Yeah.
You have to buy some to use some. And so going way back to 2011, when I first got some Bitcoin, I wanted to immediately use it. And the first purchase I made was a box of beef jerky from a company called Bit Jerky.
Yeah.
And it was like 1.1 Bitcoin for a 1 pound box of Bit Jerky.
1.1 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So at that time was worth how much in dollars?
About $15, $17, something like that.
And what would it be worth today?
Today, I think at today's price, which is fluctuating quite a bit, pretty volatile asset, I think it's around $30,000 per Bitcoin.
So that's a $30,000
about a $33,000
box of beef jerky. Pretty pricey.
Yeah.
How was it?
Even just the 0.1 added to the end of that.
Yeah, that's a good chunk of change right there.
Right.
So how did it taste?
Oh, good. Yeah, it was really great. Great jerky. Wouldn't mind having that Bitcoin back. And not have experienced the taste of the jerky. But at the same time, I wanted to have the experience of using it. And so
Yeah.
right now I am in what's called an Ethereum 2.0 validator node. Ethereum was a proof of work blockchain using a GPU hash algorithm, but they've since transitioned last year to a proof of stake model for the consensus algorithm. And so what that means is instead of actually like burning energy to produce hashes to secure the blockchain, instead they use nodes that stake a certain amount of tokens. In this case, I've staked 32 Ether and started my own validator node through a service called All Nodes. And by running this server and by staking your Ether, you become a validator of the blockchain, and for that you earn almost like an interest yield on your staking. And so I think that percentage right now is somewhere around 4%. I haven't looked recently. I just kind of let it run and accrue more Ether.
Cha-ching.
Yeah. But the price is always fluctuating, so you never know what you're going to get in terms of investment performance out of these, especially in a time like today where the Federal Reserve is hiking rates and we've got another quantitative tightening cycle going on. And the last time that happened in 2018, it was not a good year for crypto.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you really never know what you're going to get with these types of investments. And so I don't hold a lot of it in my portfolio, especially right now in an uncertain time. But I do definitely have this validator node definitely puts me in the camp of, having a decent amount invested. One of the aspects of that I didn't mention is one of the things you agree to going into being a validator node was not being able to unstake and sell your Ether. So I'm actually locked into it until they release a software update that actually allows it. But I've been in this node now for over a year and have not been able to withdraw or sell it. So,
held captive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that software release is just around the corner, unless they push it back again and again, which has happened over the last couple of years. So with software, you have to deal with software schedules, and when a lot of money is involved, you kind of want them to perfect and test it thoroughly. Otherwise, if they prematurely launch something with some bugs in it that put your funds at risk, the trade-off there is pretty dangerous. So I'd rather they take the time to do it right. But it is a little frustrating to have been locked in a lot longer than people have expected up front. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and then again, just another word about your book. You're putting the finishing touches on it, finishing up the edits, and then looking to publish it this year. So when it's published, I'll link to it below, down in the comments below. So for anybody with an interest in Bitcoin, or just whether they want to invest in coins themselves or just learn more about it and kind of the evolution of that of blockchain technology, and hear your story about investing with it. I think it's a great read, and they should get readers should get their hands on it. So I'll link to that when it becomes possible to link to your book and people can buy it.
Yeah, excellent.
What do you know about Canada?
I know we get a lot of our potash from Canada.
What is potash?
Oh, it's like a potassium sort of rich substance that's used in agriculture. Yeah. I think as kind of like a fertilizer base, but yeah, it's something that came up recently in terms of sources of potash, because Russia is one of them, and we had these sanctions. And so
okay.
That came up recently as kind of like a risk factor for not being able to do a lot of business with Russia. But it turns out Canada has plenty of potash. So,
and pot.
And pot, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you some Canadian trivia questions. It sounds like you know a lot about potash, but we'll find out about some other aspects of Canadian culture here, whether or not you can answer these questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready as I'm ever going to be.
Okay. Question 1. What is the name of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's wife?
That would be Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. I think that's how you say it.
Final answer?
Gregoire?
You're correct. Okay.
Yeah.
And how old, question 2, how old is Sophie Gregoire Trudeau?
How old is Sophie? Well, it must be 47 years old.
Yeah, right on the nose. You got it. All right. Question 3, Canadian trivia. When is Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's birthday?
Well, that's how I knew her age, because, you know, I've celebrated her birthday every year now for, well, at least today. So I think that's April 24th, 1975.
That's right.
Which means 47, but pretty soon to be 48.
Soon to be 48 years old. Maybe by the time this goes up, she'll actually be 48. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Question 4. 3 for 3 so far, for anyone who's keeping track. Question 4. How many children does Sophie Gregoire Trudeau have with her husband, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
3 kids.
3 children, that's right. And final question. Question 5. As of 2020, Canada has hosted 2 Winter Olympic Games. Name both cities that hosted. Did you think this question was going to be about Sophie Gregoire Trudeau? Threw you for a loop there, didn't I?
Yeah, that one came out of left field.
So let me repeat this. As of 2020, Canada has hosted two Winter Olympic Games. Name both cities that hosted.
Well, I mean, Vancouver, that seems like an obvious choice. I think I remember something about a Vancouver Olympics. And the second one, it's a little harder. I'm going to go with Calgary.
Final answer? Vancouver and Calgary?
Yeah. Final answer.
You're correct. 5 for 5. Congratulations, Kain Osterholt.
Amazing.
Wow. You know a lot about Canada. Not just potash, but also Sophie Gregoire Trudeau.
Yeah. I'm glad I pulled up her Wikipedia recently.
Well, sometimes, yeah, you never know where Wikipedia will lead you, right? And then when you'll be able to use that information. Well, Kain, thank you for joining me on Work in Progress. You were a fantastic guest, and learned a lot from you today, and learned a lot about Canada as well.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, fantastic show, and looking forward to getting the book done, and yeah, seeing what's next for you as well, and yeah, it's been much appreciated.
Cool, man. Let's get a burger. He did great. Ooh, thank you.
Yeah.